What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to basketball. And more importantly, welcome back to our season preview series, the series where we're going to dive into every single NBA team before the start of the regular season. In these videos, we go really in depth. We're going to go over rotations, what kind of assets do they have, what's their salary cap situation, what do their offseason look like. We'll mock up some trades, everything that you need to get yourself ready for the start of the regular season. In this video, we have the Atlanta Hawks, who just had the #1 pick, so this should be a fun video to break down. So make sure you guys like, subscribe, and comment. I've responded to every single comment on my YouTube channel up to this point, and I intend to keep on doing so. All right, let's get into it. Alrighty, y'all, as you can see, there's a lot to get into here, so we want to start talking about the Atlanta Hawks. Before we do that, though, this is my season preview spreadsheet. I like to build spreadsheets in my videos to kind of help articulate and visualize everything in the series. If this is something you want access to, it's a pretty cool tool that I've built. You can get access to it. All you have to do is leave me a comment saying something along the lines of, I would like access to the spreadsheet. I'll then drop you a link to come join my Discord. Once you're on there, just shoot me a DM saying, hey, I was the person from the video. I'll give you access to the spreadsheet. It's really easy, giving it out to a bunch of people so far, and helps out the video algorithm and everything. But anyway, the Atlanta Hawks. They're in a weird situation. I know you guys already see this on the screen and everything here. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. The Hawks had one of those really gross seasons last year where they went 36-46, just enough to like get them back into the play-in again and then not do anything, so you don't typically get a great draft pick out of it. They lucked out, though, and the NBA lottery gods blessed them and gave them the first overall pick in this draft, to which it wasn't the best draft class ever. Is there a generational talent in there? Probably not. Is there a future all-star? Statistics say there always is, so somebody's going to make an all-star team out of here, but we have a hard time telling who that's going to be out of this draft. This isn't the draft that you necessarily want to get the first overall pick, but you know what? It's better that than them getting like the 10th or 11th pick like they were going to get, right? So they had their choice of who they wanted. They ended up taking Zachary Reese-Shea, however you say it, with the first overall pick, and I feel like he's the most like under talked about first overall pick that I can remember. Nobody's talking about this guy at all. Nobody's excited to see him play or anything, but that's just this draft class, right? Isn't it so weird? But anyway, the Hawks are in this weird space now. They've got a pretty talented roster overall, but it doesn't win any games. We found out that the DeJounte Murray-Trae Young duo didn't work at all, and that one made a lot of sense on paper from the beginning that it wasn't going to work out at all. We were all curious to see it, but it didn't work like at all. It wasn't a good thing for them. They weren't winning enough games. This team struggles to play defense still for whatever reason, even though they have a lot of good defensive players. Trae Young improved his defense last year. It still wasn't great, but it was at least serviceable, and they still couldn't win. So there's just a lot of questions now, and it's like, okay, this team could like blow things up, and it could go in a bunch of different directions from there and just try to reset. But you also have Trae Young, who is a good basketball player, and you have gone decently far with him in a playoff series before, so is this just a case of retooling? We don't know, and the franchise has given us no reason to think it's either directions right now. So that's why I have a special franchise status for the Atlanta Hawks today. Normally it's one of these four here that we talk about, but today it's who the fuck knows. I have no clue where this team is going. I have no idea what they'd like to do, but anyway, we're going to talk about them and break things down. Before we do that, let's go into goals really quick. I like to talk about these before we get into the rest of the video, just because I think it's important for you guys to keep these in mind as we're talking through everything. So let's talk about the goals. First thing, what are we doing with Trae Young, right? Because that determines the direction of the franchise. I think it has to be the worst thing for sports fans when you don't have any idea what your team is going to do. Like, you'd rather either be bad and rebuilding, think Brooklyn Nets, right? Or you're contending like the Boston Celtics, right? Or even building towards that, right? Like, the Hawks have no idea what they're doing right now. They're not good, but they're not that bad either. And they've got this star player that this is the year they should probably trade him, if they're going to trade him, because there's enough years in the contract to where a team can make it worth their while and everything. It is harder to trade players. It's just harder than ever to trade people, and we'll talk about that, but they have to figure out what they're doing with Trae Young. Are we keeping him or are we not? There's an argument for both sides, and honestly, in the comments, I want to hear what you guys think about that. Then we have to talk about point guard depth, because after Trae Young, they have a real problem at point guard in this position. Losing ball handlers in DeJounte Murray this offseason. There's not a lot else going on in this team, so that could be an interesting area for them. And then improve asset management. What do I mean by that? Improving the asset management means they've got a lot of like key players in positions where there's just too much depth. So you need to like rework how your assets are working. Like this team's like draft pick situation, we could improve that a little bit. We could move on from a couple other players to help bolster other positions. Like it's just kind of like jumbled everywhere right now, and it doesn't make a ton of sense. So somebody needs to come through and like clean this up and organize this, and we can talk about that in this video. But let's go through this off season because obviously a lot happened. Alrighty, so here's our off season page. I always break this up into 3 different parts. We've got drafted players, you understand what that means. Player departures, so players that were on like the full roster last year that are no longer on it, and then players brought in were players that obviously weren't on the roster last year that were then brought in. Let's start off with drafted players. Let's talk about Zachary Risache, or Risache, however you want to pronounce it, right? The Frenchman. A lot of people thought it was going to be Alex Sarr going first. I personally liked Alex Sarr a little bit more just because he was a little bit bigger and it's harder to find bigger guys, but I saw them on very even playing fields, and I do think both of those guys are like starter level guys in the NBA right away. I do think that they're pretty good players. Risache, really interesting player. We did a whole film breakdown on him. I really do like this guy's game. He's a good shooter. He can put the ball on the floor a little bit. He's a decent athlete. He's like grown into his body still a little bit, which we kind of broke down in the film. There's some times where he's not quite as explosive, and I've just seen it a lot of times when I've worked with like 19 to like 21-year-old players, as they're still kind of just growing in and figuring themselves out. They have moments where they kind of blow the tire and don't go anywhere. It's just their body's getting used to being that big and explosive. It's crazy to be this size and this athletic. It takes a while for your body to get used to it. I know I went through it at certain points, like in high school and everything. But this guy's got the capabilities of really being a 3-level scorer. He sees the game pretty well, should turn into a decent defender one day if you develop him correctly. All around looks like a very nice player. Do we think he has like all-star potential? I don't necessarily see that right off the bat, but he seems to understand the game pretty well overall. And so I think it's a fine pick. I think it makes sense playing him next to Trae Young. Having a lengthy wing is cool like this. Those are the guys you want. But is it the generational talent you'd hope for at one? Probably not. And then they have Nikola Jurzic. I don't know how to pronounce it. I know there's one person in the comments that's so excited to hear about this guy. I watched him at the Combine, and he was really, really interesting. Sounds like he's going to be going overseas, though, so not that much to worry about right now. Just kind of a bigger ball handler for them, maybe in the future. But for the time being, nope, not going to be joining the team right now. Player departures. Obviously, all-star level talent DeJounte Murray just didn't fit in with this Trae Young thing, and yeah, we all knew that it didn't make sense for them to do that in the first place. But they were trying to put talent around Trae Young. You can't necessarily fault that. At the end of the day, they were trying to make something good happen for them, and it didn't work. So DeJounte Murray's on his way out to New Orleans, where he'll get to be the primary ball handler again. He can be the primary operator for their offense and everything. Good for him, right? Sadiq Bey is also out, a guy that was kind of an experiment for them. They ended up just not bringing him back. He went out and signed in Washington. He was hurt most of last season anyway, so not seeing a ton of loss there. Bruno Fernando, who's been a reserve big for them for a couple years. I actually think he's a serviceable player at the end of the day. Like, he's got his weaknesses, and he's a little bit undersized, so, you know, you're not always getting like the best defensive stats out of him or anything like that, but I do think he could be serviceable for some of these teams looking to try to add to some big man depth, but not a huge loss there. AJ Griffin was traded to the Rockets and kind of just a salary dump move. How many years has it been since he's been out of Duke now? I can't even remember, but ideally, he was going to be like a 3-and-D dude. He's a little bit undersized, but not quite skilled enough to be like a shooting guard. He's kind of been playing the wing up to this point. So he's just been kind of a weird in-between talent and hasn't really turned into too much yet. So kind of giving up on that project, it sounds like. Wesley Matthews, veteran sharpshooter. You guys are familiar with him. I don't think he's been picked up by anybody yet. And then Trent Forrest, who didn't play a ton of minutes for them overall. So not a big deal. So you didn't really lose a ton outside of DeJounte, which it's tough that you lost him. Who did you get for DeJounte Murray, though? Well, it's not the most exciting crop of people either. You got Dyson Daniels, and obviously they got some draft picks, right? Like, they did get like some draft capital because of that, and that's great. But yeah, it wasn't a great haul overall considering everything you traded to go get DeJounte Murray. You got back Dyson Daniels, young Australian, like, he's listed on my statistics service, which I can't actually display on here because I'm pretty sure that breaches my terms of contract. In essence, us coaches have access to this thing called Synergy, which is a really cool platform where we watch a lot of film, do a lot of statistics work and things like that. I can't show that on film, but they have him listed as a shooting guard. Some people have tried to play him at point guard and stuff. I don't see that myself, but what have we seen out of Dyson Daniels in his young career? can handle the ball sometimes, hasn't looked great. He's played pretty good defense, and we're hoping that he becomes a better shooter. So the hope for Dyson is that he becomes a 3-and-D wing, because he's got good size to him and everything, but unfortunately this is what his shooting charts are looking like right now. And if you're curious, the colors have to go with the corresponding to like league averages and stuff. So we're seeing a lot of below average stuff. We're seeing a lot of inconsistencies in being able to completely get to the rim. Looks like the floater game is solid at least, so that's good. But again, we're not really getting to the spots on the floor that we want to. We're not seeing a large volume of shots coming from three either. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Do we have like an actual like 3-point percentage for some of these? We have like effective field goal percentage. I wish they just put the standard field goal percentage on here, because that's all I really want to see. But regardless, it hasn't been great for Dyson so far, but it is a project player. Like, he does have some potential. You get a lot of effort out of him, so that's something nonetheless. They got Larry Nance Jr., who's a good backup center in this league just because his defense is pretty solid despite his height. He's going to fight for rebounds. He can still get up and above the rim, which is nice, but do you really still need him on this team? It's hard to say. They've got a bunch of other playable centers on this team, so he was obviously thrown in for mostly salary purposes, but maybe you repurpose him. Maybe he's a buyout candidate. He'd be a really desirable buyout player this year if that's what happened to him, but nonetheless, he's on the team now. David Roddy, he's been a journeyman at this point. I've actually played with David Roddy a couple times, just in like some pro-ams and stuff like that, but David Roddy, weird basketball player, right? Only about like 6'4", jacked as all hell. They've tried to play him from everywhere from the 2 to the 4, and it hasn't really worked because, again, this is one of those things where he's not like athletic or like good enough with his handle to be a guard. He tends to guard forwards, but he's so undersized. I don't know. It just hasn't really worked for David Roddy yet. He's got some interesting skill sets to him, but I think a lot of times when you have these positionless players, there's kind of a reason why they're positionless, because there's not a space for them on the court. There's just some builds that don't quite work, and that's kind of how I view David Roddy. But that doesn't mean that he can't turn into something. He can't work his way back onto the court in some way. I mean, he's going to be on the roster this year, and maybe they can find a use for him. I don't know. And then we got Cody Zeller, everybody's favorite accountant. No, I just love that Cody Zeller's still around, man. Worked his way kind of onto the Pelicans at the end of last season, was involved in the sign and trade for DeJounte Murray. Gonna go out there and hustle for you. The athleticism's looking pretty rough at this point, in all honesty, but he's on the team. It's like I'm saying, there's a lot of bigs on this team that, like, they're serviceable, and some of them are even pretty solid, and like Capella and Okongwu and stuff, but then you've just got these extra guys that you're like, okay, what do we do with them? So that was kind of their offseason. They unloaded DeJounte. They brought in the first overall pick, which no one really seems to care about, and maybe rightfully so. It's hard to say, but there's not a lot of other excitement like really coming into the team right now, so they're kind of just running it back with the group they got. So let's take a look at that group. Let's talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses and everything and go from there. Alrighty, y'all. So most of you know that this is my favorite tab on the entire workbook, because this is basically my ideal off-season spreadsheet right here, but on a singular page. This does a lot of cool things for us. We can take a look at like the whole roster and the salary situation. We can look at the overall team salary situation, their draft picks, their depth chart, everything that we need to kind of break down the current team and their current assets and situations. The place I want to start off with always is draft picks, because I think it's a good idea to understand what kind of assets that we're working with outside of players before we go into the rest of the conversations. So let's start there. Zooming in here to take a look at the draft picks. So it's not a deep collection of draft picks, right? They threw a lot of draft picks away when they went to go get DeJounte Murray, and they've made a couple other moves here and there, but it's not a deep like treasure chest of picks. It's not horrible either. They've reconciled it a little bit, and I will note that some picks not shown have protections or swaps or things like that. So some of the first round picks that you do or don't see on here, they do have like swap rights or something. That's more so why it's not listed. But regardless, what are we working with? Well, next year's draft is a big one, right? We're all anticipating this is going to be a year of like quite a few pretty good basketball players entering the draft. So having assets for that is going to be valuable to anybody, right? And the Hawks have a couple of those. Obviously, they could have like their own pick. I can't remember if it's a swap or they just traded it outright. They might have just traded next year's outright now that I think about it. So that's unfortunate, but they do still have some other assets. They just have the Lakers first round pick next year, which the Lakers could just be bad for all we know. We have no clue how good they'll be. So that's a valuable pick in itself. And they have the Kings first round pick protected 1 through 12. I'm going to assume the Kings aren't a lottery team this next year, so they should still have access to 2 first round picks. And they have a Timberwolves second round pick. Probably not going to be that good, but it is an asset nonetheless. You go into 2026. not looking great. Don't have a huge asset pool here. They have a complicated 2027 pick. Then they have their own pick back in like 2028, 29, 30, and 31. So it's not the prettiest outlook in the world. They have fixed it up a little bit just because of some of the picks they got in like trading DeJounte Murray out again. So that's good. They were able to acquire a couple things for an important draft year and everything, but it'd be nice if we could try to stockpile a few more assets, or because we do have access to a couple things, we got to find a way to retool this team sooner rather than later, right? Because look, if we're going to try to win with Trae Young, which I think is possible, I think it's hard. I think it's really hard when you have a guy that plays the way he does to make him kind of the centerpiece of your team. I think you can do some things with it, though, and it just involves retooling the roster a little bit. But, like, in all honesty, this team is pretty good, like, in a lot of different positions. It just doesn't work in its current mold, so you need to bring in some sort of other star player, obviously, for sure. You got to have some internal development and other things, so you guys are going to have to let me know what direction you'd want to go with these draft picks. I'd have to assume Hawks fans overall want to kind of blow things up, but I'm not going to tell you that, like, you can't do things with Trae Young, because that's just ignorant, and anyone that tells you otherwise is just a moron. But at the end of the day, this is the situation they find themselves in. So let's talk about cap space now. So if you guys are new to the channel, these are the 4 different levels of the salary cap for you to know. If you want a deeper breakdown, go watch the first video or 2 in this series. It's the Celtics or in Grizzlies videos, but I'll give you a brief rundown. So 4 different levels to things. There's cap space itself. That one's pretty basic. They've run out of cap space. Then you go into luxury tax. Once you pass that one and this one hits 0, now all of a sudden you're paying a little bit extra for your team. The first and second apron are newer to the NBA as of the past couple seasons, and the rules keep adjusting ever so slightly. These rules are very complicated. They've added a lot of different things to them. So when these hit 0, your team starts to get restricted a ton, meaning different things like you can't trade certain people, you can't acquire so much salary, you can't play in the buyout market, you can't use certain draft picks, everything like that. And the NBA put this in place so that star players would stop getting traded so much. They're basically saying, hey, if you've got a really, really good basketball team, we're going to make it very hard for you to make any moves. We're going to lock your players into place, and the only way that you can go is down. That's the only place you can go, is by trading them for like less talented players and stuff like that. So they're making it very difficult for super teams to build, for star players to be traded, things like that. And I think it's good for the NBA. I personally like it. It is good for their retention numbers and stuff as well, and their fan base numbers. Like, it's just better for the league overall, and I think the strategy behind it is interesting. But nonetheless, it is something to observe. The Hawks find themselves in a pretty decent situation. Obviously, they're creeping up on the salary tax line, and they do have 1 roster spot left to use, which I'm assuming that they're leaving it open. You're actually seeing a lot more teams leave open a roster spot just because of this, because they're trying to stay away from these aprons and these tax lines and stuff, because teams are scared of these things. Like, they don't want to just get locked in if they can help it. Like, the best of the best teams, like your Celtics and stuff, they're going to be right there in it, and they've locked their team down. And that's why you see guys like Jamal Murray and stuff getting these big contract extensions, because the NBA is incentivizing you to keep your own players. They don't want players going elsewhere. But when you look at this Hawks team, they've avoided the aprons, so that's good. So they have flexibility to make whatever moves that they want, and they can pick whatever direction they really want to go. But it's not like the best situation ever, considering like the level of production you actually get out of this team. You'd probably hope that it's like a little bit cheaper, but look, you've got a couple expensive guys on this team, but it's not like any of these guys are untradeable. It's just, where are you going to trade them to? Because of the new trade rules, you've got guys like, and I'm just going to scroll over here for a second, like a DeAndre Hunter. Makes a ton of sense to try and trade DeAndre Hunter right now. He's a valuable player. He's a little bit younger, but you got Risa Shea kind of waiting in the wings right now. And you're like, okay, like, he's got 3 years left, $21 million, but a contender probably wants like DeAndre Hunter, right? Well, the contenders are all in like the first and second apron right now, so it's really hard for them to make those trades because they're restricted in what they can do. So it's complicated now. It's really hard to do these things. But anyway, let's talk about the current roster. So Trae Young, we talked about him a little bit. His dynamicness and his offensive skill is awesome, right? He can take on 3 guys at once. He can go get buckets. He can pass with the best of them. His defense is starting to improve, especially in like pick and roll coverage and stuff like that. That's awesome, right? What still pains me to this day is when he catches James Harden disease. That's what I call it in coaching, and it's when guys don't move when they don't have the basketball. They just float on the perimeter and wait for the ball to come back to them. We haven't seen anybody try to implement a Steph Curry-like thing where he's using his gravity and running around to suck people up and gain more offense, or just working to get himself open outside of dribbling the basketball. And I think a lot of us hope that we would kind of start to see that by now. You know, he's been in the league for a little bit now. He is a max contract player. Like, let's see the game actually grow a little bit more. And so Trae Young's a really good player. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to hate on Trae Young at all. It's just we'd like to see a little more growth. And that's why I say I have some concerns about him being like your best player on the team per se. Like, I think he's a dog, and I love his energy and his mentality. That's all the stuff I love. I love that he thinks he's a villain and everything, and he wants to take on like New York and everything and wave bye to the fans. I'm all for that stuff. I love that in my team captain and everything, but I just feel like we need to see the game adjust a little bit more if we're going to make it worth our while, and the team has to decide what they're going to do with him this year. Moving on to Clint Capella, I can't tell you how many NBA coaches I've talked to that are just like, I want more players like Clint Capella. They're like, he just knows his role and does it perfectly. He doesn't try to do anything outside of his role, which is run, jump, dunk, block shots. He's like, that's my job. I grab some rebounds, I dunk the basketball when Trae throws it up, I block some shots. Don't do anything else. Like, I'm never out of position. He's always in the dunker spot, rotating the right way around the rim and everything. Plays good defense. Awesome. Clint Capella is on the last year of a deal, though, and there are a lot of other people playing center on this team. So Clint Capella could be really valuable to a team like the Pelicans or something like that, which, like, I can't believe that this trade between, like, DeJounte Murray and that team happened, and there wasn't a center, like, gained from New Orleans in any capacity. It's just, it seems so odd to me. It seems like these two teams need to make another trade in some way because there's just so many centers on the Hawks. But regardless, it's a thing. We talked about DeAndre Hunter, who, when he got drafted, I was telling like all my other scout buddies, I'm like, he's going to be like exactly as good as he is now. And that's cool. Like, he's a starter level player, but he's like never going to get better. And that's what I anticipated. And that's like exactly what's happened here. Like, he's obviously improved like some efficiency numbers and things like that. I'll pull up his charts in a second, but like DeAndre Hunter's good for like 16, 17 points a game, plays nice enough defense or whatever. But like, that's kind of just all it's been at this point. Some of his scoring locations are kind of weird, and we'll look at that. But interestingly enough, he's a pretty solid player. So DeAndre Hunter's like a 36 to 38% three-point shooter. I don't exactly remember like what he is, but you're seeing that there's a lot of these mid-range shots, and that's what you see come out of him a lot. And obviously he doesn't hit a high enough clip of them to make him worth it. So sometimes I question that stuff, and he's pretty poor at the rim, honestly. So that's a bit of a weakness for him. But like overall, like defensive numbers, like aren't that bad and everything, and I'll pull that up in a second as well. But you have a very capable, lengthy 3-and-D defender that's got a little bit of time left on the contract or whatever still. So like, how do you turn him into a valuable asset, or is he a guy that you can keep around Trae Young long term because he is a little bit younger? Moving on to Bogdan Bogdanovic, one of those guys on the Serbian national team that had a great offseason, so shout out to him. It's, again, supposed to be kind of a 3-and-D wing that can handle the ball a little bit, go get some buckets. Another guy that a lot of teams could use on their team. If you look at some of Bogdanovic's like shooting charts and everything like that, honestly, let's just go take a look at like the percentages really quick. You're getting a 37% three-point shooter on 8 attempts a game, which is absolutely nuts. Where's the free throw percentage? You're getting 92% from there. The field goal percentage itself is a little bit weak, but you're getting like 17 points a game out of this dude. Defensive numbers traditionally are actually pretty solid. They're not like good, they're not bad. Like, you typically see them around the 114 to 115 defensive rating. This last year, last year, like, all of these dudes fell into like the 120, which is abysmal. This team just did not know how to play defense last year for whatever reason. They've got capable defenders on the team, but they can't figure out what to do with it. So I'm kind of wanting to throw that out. That just seems like a statistical anomaly and more so a coaching error than an individual player error, even though defensive rating does a pretty good job of like rating people as individuals. It just seems like none of the players were in points of success to be good defenders or anything, right? So that's what we have with Bogdanovic. Again, could be a trade piece for them. Hard to say. Onyeka Okongwu, a guy that's a pretty good starting center in spot time when you need him to be. A little bit undersized, but plays good defense, rebounds the ball well, has a nasty mid-range jumper whenever he can get to it, so feels very like 2010s center to me. But this is a guy that maybe you should try him as your starting center for a little bit, and when you move on from Capella, and just see what you got. Like, is this a guy that is your long-term starting center or something like that? We just don't know. He's never really gotten the chance to do so because there's always been somebody in front of him the whole time. But his game is pretty simple overall, but I like Okongwu. I'd like to see more time with him. You've got him on a very team-friendly deal going forward. That's why I'm saying, like, you should figure out if this is your starting center, because if you have him for the next 4 years and only $14 million, That's a steal. Talked about Reese Shea a little bit. Talked about Larry Nance and Dyson Daniels. Jalen Johnson, the Wisconsin native himself. One of the more breakout players that we saw in the NBA as a power forward. We saw like the 3-point stats went up like a little bit. So Jalen Johnson got himself up to like 35, 36% on like 3 to 4 attempts a game last year. That's awesome. Probably want to see the free throw percentage go up a little bit, but we got him up to like 16 points a game, which was a nice jump for him. His athleticism and ball handling were nice additions as well. Very welcome to see like that start to develop in him. Clearly favors one side of the court when you take a look at this, but he does a lot of his damage around the rim with his athleticism. He's got a nice build to him, pretty big and strong, can get around the rim and finish from multiple spots. He's actually pretty good at creating and getting himself there as well. So how much further can we take his game? That's kind of the question, right? Because this was a guy that was very highly touted coming out of high school. Went to Duke, didn't play at Duke very long, kind of just stepped away from it. It was like a really weird season for them, and then has kind of just been building himself back up into the NBA, and he's become a really nice player. Can we continue to try to iron out some of these other spots, and maybe we get some more frequency out here from three? Maybe we get some consistency out here around the rim, where we're getting a little bit more space for him to operate. Like, this team would be really interesting to see with like a spacing big on it somehow. They don't necessarily have that as an option currently, but it'd be interesting. And you want to make sure you keep the run, jump, and dunk players around Trae Young as much as possible, because those will just get you a lot of easy shots. But his growth has been awesome. Nonetheless, we like Jalen Johnson on this team. Kobe Buffkin was a rookie for them last year that had a pretty rough season overall. His efficiency was pretty porous. We're not quite sure what position he's going to play yet. They've tried him at point guard a little bit. I've seen him mostly at the 2, I feel like, but he's young. It's going to take some time. Hopefully can be an explosive guard for them, but had a little bit of a rough first season. Cody Zeller and David Roddy, we talked about. Garrison Matthews, one of the meanest white boys in the NBA. I just love this guy's like energy and his passion that he plays with. A very physical dude, no nonsense, 3-point shooter, hopefully. Just kind of catch and shoot fire guy for you at the end of the bench. And then you got Vit. You got the boy Vit. Was Vit a rookie last year? I can't remember exactly what he was classified at, but he's like a 6'8 dude that like could play a little bit of point guard. I believe he started as a 2-way player, if I'm correct. You guys correct me in the comments because I don't remember, but he got added to the team like a little bit later, or maybe he never was like a full roster player. I actually can't even remember that, but he got a new deal or whatever, so he's back on the team, and we saw like really interesting stuff from him. Like, we saw some shooting, we saw some athleticism, we saw decent enough defense and everything for a team that didn't play great defense like at all, but you saw a lot of different skill sets out of this dude. So how do we keep him on the court and like keep trying to develop him, or trying to develop him and see like if we have a long-term prospect here? Because he's on a great deal and we got some decent production out of him. I mean, if we can go over and look at Vit, where is Vit? You got 6 points per game out of him. You got 41% from 3, 49% or just field goal percentage in general. Shot well from the free throw line. Got a couple assists out of him. The rebounding was meh overall. Didn't turn the ball over a ton. Like, I want to explore this guy. He's 23 years old. He's got a good size to him. Like, let's see what we can do with Vit, man. And then we got just one extra roster spot overall. So that's kind of what the team outlook is right now. It's not a crazy expensive team, but the tradable players that you'd want to move have a little bit more salary in them. And you look at some of the years that they have left. So like Clint Capella is going to be off your books this year. Larry Nance is going to be off your books. You're going to want to do something with Jalen Johnson and everything. Garrison Matthews, it's not a big deal. So you're probably not looking at a ton of cap space, because you're going to have to bring Jalen Johnson back and give him a significant raise. So you probably want to start moving some of these other guys so that you can better use your assets, right? We talked about that at the beginning, like improve the asset management. We got to move on from some of these guys, because otherwise you've got a really expensive team that you're locked into that isn't going anywhere. So moves need to be made, and they got to make them soon. If we could talk about the depth chart overall, I mean, let's start at point guard. Really, the only true point guard on the team is Trae Young. So that's a great start. Could probably use more traditional point guards after that. You look at the shooting guard position, you got like Bogey, Dyson Daniels will be an interesting project, right? Kobe, we're going to keep developing him. Garrison's a nice veteran to have in reserve. Actually a pretty good like small forward look here between Hunter, Reese Shea, and Vit here. Vit can probably play some like spot like ball handling moments. You're going to try to see if Reese Shea can do any bit of that at points, maybe even Dyson Daniels being another one. Bogey can do a little bit as well. But like, so you've got a lot of people that kind of can handle the ball here, but they're not going to necessarily create a ton of offense for themselves. But I'd have to imagine somebody in this small forward group like can go, and I like to think DeAndre Hunter, you can get a decent amount for him, and you'd rather just let Risa Shea like play as much as possible. That's what I'd do at least, but maybe Trae Young wants his best shot at winning right now. I don't know. Jalen Johnson, really the only super valuable power forward on this roster. You got David Roddy there waiting in the wings. He's at least played some NBA minutes, and then you've got like all these capable centers. Like I said, what can we get for Clint Capella? Somebody will give us something. A Kongwu, I want to see if he can be a starting center. Larry Nance can be valuable to somebody. Like, I want to see them use these assets in a better way to either say, okay, we're trying to win basketball games. Let's go even out the rest of this roster a little bit more. Let's go get another point guard that can initiate a little bit. Maybe we try and find a stretch big or something to kind of help build the dynamicness. Maybe somebody to play with Jalen Johnson or something like that. I don't know, but regardless, we want to start to explore some of these things. How can we make some of these trades happen? I'm going to explore a couple trades right now, and we'll just kind of go through them, discuss them, and we'll leave it up to you guys then. Alrighty, y'all, so we're back here on Fanspo, where we're going to try to execute a trade or two, and there's two different ideas that I have. I technically have three, but I want to explain that really quick. So I'm not going to lie, like trying to figure out how to add star players to rosters right now is really complicated. There is a way where we can get Brandon Ingram on this team, and I don't hate that idea. I personally don't. I'm not going to take the time to like do the whole thing in this one because I feel like in my heart, I know that that's not really going to take the team anywhere, and so I don't want to advise something like that. But if you wanted to try to say like, hey, we're just going to give it another go with a different star player, I can't fault somebody for wanting to do that. So if that's something y'all want to draw up, you can do it. I'm not going to do it in this case. What I do think could be interesting is I feel like there could be a trade here between the Magic and the Hawks here. And I think that this is where if we want to start going a different direction, like we want to start to like rebuild and tear this team down a little bit, I think this is a small move that we could make to do so. I think a Bogdanovich would make a ton of sense on the Magic. Adding like that 3-and-D type of player to them at the wing could be really, really valuable. They could probably use more point guards as well, but we'd be sending Bogey over here, and then we'd be taking back Cole Anthony, so a different guard, right? And then we'd also be taking back Jet Howard. Where's Jet at? There he is. So as a younger player that, again, a little bit of size, a little bit of shooting, I could picture him and Risa Shea playing right next to each other with Trae Young. Defense might be questionable then, but hey, you could have a lot of shooting and a lot of athleticism and stuff like that. This trade should work. Would we probably throw another pick onto there? Maybe like a second-round pick or something like that. I don't think it's anything crazier than that because Jet Howard was just like a first-round pick and stuff like that. Cole Anthony is like a proven good basketball player. So I think that that's one trade that we can do. I'm going to make one other move, and this isn't like we're not gaining a big player out of this next one, and I'm not exactly sure how this is going to draw up, but I have an idea in my head. And this isn't like completely a teardown, because I think there's another role the Hawks could have this year in facilitating 3-team deals to kind of take on bad salaries and stuff like that and kind of buy some picks. I think there's a way to do that, so let's mock that up. So just hear me out, y'all. What if I take the Knicks and I also take the Clippers? I know you're like, whoa, what the hell is going on here? I think there's a world where I think we all know that there's a possibility that Julius Randle like could be on the block and could be a valuable thing for somebody this year. The Clippers could use a way to get more star players on their team. So let's say we're moving Julius Randle over to the Clippers. That could be an interesting fit for them, right? That could be something interesting. Where do the Hawks fit into this? The Hawks are moving on from Clint Capella, right? They get him off the team. The Knicks need a center. They get a new center, right? They're happy with getting their true center. They have him and Mitch Robb on the team now. That's awesome. Somebody needs to dump some salary now, right? A couple people need to dump some salary. And how are they going to do that? They're going to use the Atlanta Hawks to do that. So I think the people that make the most sense to move is like a Terrence Mann would come back to the Hawks along with a PJ Tucker so that you can relieve yourself of a little bit of salary. I guess you're not saving yourself a ton right now. You're more so spacing it out, but they're still expiring contracts, so that's good, I guess, at the very least. So but we're going to get some draft picks out of this. We got to get some draft picks out of that. So where is this going to come from? So they have some first round picks here. This Washington pick's going to mean absolutely nothing to them. They can't trade their 2026 first round pick here. So maybe they're throwing some seconds at us or something like this for Clint Capella. Is that the best way to go about it? Because the Clippers just don't have access to a ton of things. So I think this is going to be something where they're just going to take on like a bunch of seconds and send them back to the Hawks. Like, we're going to send you some picks here, right? Because we're helping the Knicks out quite a bit. You guys send us like a second round pick as well. Does this trade work in its own? No, the Clippers got to get rid of a little bit more money, and the Knicks can probably take on a little bit more. Is this where like Bones Highland, who doesn't get to play at all, gets moved as well? Can we take him back on the Hawks? We'd have to like cut somebody else or move somebody else. Is there like a cheap contract that we could move in some way, like to make this work? Let me just try this as is. Does this work? So this actually works. This isn't like the worst trade in the world. You get a Bones Highland who's kind of similar type of player to Trae Young. So long term, I don't know how great you feel about it, but at least you get to play, and then you take back some other vets and stuff like that. You get some draft assets for Clint, and you facilitate a trade like this. I don't know. It's just more of an idea of them being a hub for people to send their unwanted contracts to, and they can acquire some draft picks and stuff, because as we've seen here, their treasure chest of draft picks isn't that high. So if you can pick up a couple here or there, that could be a decent way to go about it. And look, there's always the idea of them like flipping DeAndre Hunter over to like the Warriors for like an Andrew Wiggins, like Brandon Ingram coming back to this team or something like that. I feel like I see those trades all the time. So I'm trying to think outside the box a little bit and find some other ways they can contribute to this stuff. But alrighty, now that we've explored that stuff, let's talk about rotations. I always put a question mark on this because, look, we don't know what they're going to do with their rotation at the end of the day. I think it's interesting enough just to kind of do this exercise and be like, okay, what's our goal? Where do we kind of want players to kind of finish out minutes-wise throughout this year if we're trying to win some basketball games, right? And this is what we were able to draw up. So I've got Trae Young playing a shit ton of minutes, right? We all know that that's going to be the case most likely. You're going to want Bogey playing a solid amount of minutes, right? He could very well be your second leading scorer on this team, but you have a lot of balanced scoring between DeAndre Hunter and Jalen Johnson as well. I've got Jalen Johnson playing over 30 minutes. We want to encourage the growth we saw last year. Hope we can keep building on that. Clint Capella's at 24 minutes, and he's split right down the middle with Onyeka Okongwu. I think that's kind of what you do. You kind of Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively these two, and just say, hey, whoever's playing the best this night, that's who's going to get to play the most minutes. Reece Shea getting 26. He was your first overall pick. Got him coming off the bench right now, right? So we want him to still play a good amount of minutes, but I don't think you can justify playing him over a Bogdanovich, Hunter, or Johnson. I mean, these are just good NBA players, right? So coming off the bench as a first overall pick, it's uncommon, but happens sometimes, right? That's the situation we find ourselves in. Dyson Daniels getting about 18 a game. Want to try to see and explore, like, if we can build something out of him. It's one of the assets we got for DeJounte, so we've got to try, see if we can get a three-point shooter out of him. Vit, let's keep throwing him on the court, seeing what we got in him. We talked about the growth we're trying to get there. And then Kobe Buffkin, I'm throwing him out there because he might be able to play point guard. We don't know. Let's hope and pray that he can become something in that department, because we need more ball handling on this team, and he's probably got the best chance of doing so out of these guys. So, look, he was a first-round pick last year. Let's try to get him on the court a little bit. And then you got Larry Nance Jr., which is a shame that he's not in the rotation. Maybe you make an argument that he should be playing more or something like that, and he's more of a 4 coming off the bench. And then you got Garrison Matthews, David Roddy, Cody Zeller, the one open roster spot. Curious to hear what you guys think of these minutes, but let's go take a look at their like lineup data last year, especially since their team is similar in a couple ways, and see what was working for them and what wasn't. All right, so here's the Hawks 5-man rotation and combinations. Actually, a lot of sample size for a couple different rotations, which is actually pretty good. And you see actually a decent balance of positive to negative rotations. So what's going wrong? Maybe they were just playing certain people together a bit too much, right? So let's take a look at this one. This one had the most minutes together last year, and it was pretty negative. DeJounte, Trae Young, Capella, Johnson, Saddiq Bey. So this was somewhat of a starting lineup for them at points whenever DeAndre Hunter wasn't playing, but Saddiq Bey, he came in and he was playing a ton while he was in, but apparently that wasn't a great combo to go with the rest of their starting 5. I'll be curious to see if the rest of the starting 5 has any other sort of similarity. So this is when Trae Young came out of the game, and they would basically go like starting 5 similar to starting 5. I know DeAndre Hunter's not a part of it, but just DeJounte Murray. that lineup wasn't working well for them. Looking at this one, where this is more of the traditional starting lineup here of Trae Young, DeJounte, Johnson, Capella, but with DeAndre Hunter, not very good. Again, DeJounte Murray playing with some of these other guys. The Bogdanovich is, yeah, basically no Trae Young with them as a starter. Didn't work well. So DeJounte Murray, a lot more towards the bottom of these rotations. You get a slightly positive one here when a Kongwu comes in for Capella. That's kind of interesting to note. Those are some things I'd like to explore further. So this rotation worked when you took Jalen Johnson out and you played 2 wings instead with Saddiq Bey and Hunter. That doesn't surprise me necessarily because you already have like 2 more so ball handlers. So having these switchable defenders makes a lot of sense here. Going into this one, what do we have here? DeJounte Murray, this lineup actually worked when they were playing with Vit. That's kind of interesting. So what can I decipher from this? They're playing 3 wings and a center around DeJounte. So basically just space out, let DeJounte work, and they have a lob threat for him. Okay, and then you've got another one here with Trae Young, a Kongwu again, Jalen Johnson, Bogdanovich, Saddiq Bey. Interesting. So some of the things that I'm noticing here is that there's some things in like the negative rotations that we're seeing. It's mostly with DeJounte and Trae together. A lot of their best rotations are when they were separated. So you might just get a better basketball team altogether by not playing those 2 together, right? Because, I mean, look at a lot of these top ones. They're just not on the court together, right? So hopefully just that in itself might spell better basketball team, right? Because those guys just don't work well with another ball handler on the court. So that's really interesting. I want to take a look at like these 3-man rotations now because I always think that's an interesting combo. So what was like some of the worst combinations that we saw? It was like Saddiq Bey, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young. Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, yeah, I see. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of Trae Young, DeJounte Murray combos that didn't work out. What were some of their best ones? There wasn't a ton of minutes behind this Okongwu, Bogdanovich, Saddiq Bey, but it was one of the better ones that they had. Clint Capella, Hunter, and Murray. There's a lot of potential defense, I should say, in there. So that makes some sense to me. DeJounte Murray, Capella again with Bogdanovich. So that's telling me again, just trying to keep Trae and DeJounte separated. DeJounte Murray with 2 wings, Trae Young without DeJounte. Yeah, that's kind of the story that we're getting from this, right? Is just those 2 just did not work, and they played a lot of minutes and a lot of minutes together. So hopefully just having Trae Young on a team by himself without DeJounte will instantly get you a little bit better, right? That's at least what the lineup data is telling us. And we've added more wings. We saw that playing with more wings helps. So hopefully having Reese Shea helps a little bit more, right? Maybe a Dyson Daniels is a valuable player to have next to him. I don't know. But for the time being, you'd like to think that it's going to get a little bit better from here. But anyway, let's go talk about predictions and everything. Alrighty, y'all. Here we are, the interesting part of the video where we get to predict a couple things. Let's do a little bit of an East recap because that's where we are. We got the Celtics and Knicks on the top. Got the Sixers here kind of in the middle. Heat kind of just squeaking in as the top of the play-in. I've got the Bulls not in it right now. The Pistons, the Nets. Where do we have the Hawks sitting? Because I know you guys could probably see it in a multitude of directions. Drum roll, please. Drum roll, please. A reminder, they were like the 10 seed last year, and that's exactly where I got them again, and that sucks. That sucks. That's not where you want to be. It's just not. But, like, I don't know. That's where I see them. I feel like they're, like, just good enough to not be bad. You know what I'm saying? And, like, it's mostly the same roster, right? It's mostly the same roster. Let's hope that not having DeJounte on the team is going to improve things a little bit for them, and hopefully just having a more traditional team around Trae Young is going to be good. But, look, do any of us really reasonably think this current team is going to be, like, anywhere, like, up here, like, 5 and above? And doesn't that tell you that we should just try to do something while we have, like, some of these contracts where they're at right now? I don't know. Here's my biggest concern is that they're going to go into this offseason. They're going to give Jalen Johnson like $25 million a year or something like that. So let's just say 25, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I need one more zero on there, right? And now all of a sudden we're a first apron team and we're locked into things, right? And I mean, maybe Clint Capella's gone or something like that, but you still want to like sign somebody else, right, to something. And I don't know. I'm worried that we're going to get this team locked up and it's not going to go anywhere. So I feel like something has to change. I feel like some moves have to happen. I want to know what you guys think in the comments below, though. Obviously, when you're in the comments, make sure you're respectful and listen to each other as always. Otherwise, I will hide you. We're not running this channel like the rest of the internet where people can just say whatever they want because they think they're keyboard warriors. But regardless, I think this is an interesting team to watch. I hope that they have a decent enough season. I hate seeing teams just ride the middle line, so I'm rooting for you Hawks fans. I really, really am. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. As always, make sure you guys share, like, subscribe, comment, and everything. I'm going to be bringing you guys a video every weekday and everything at 7 a.m. Central Time. But hey, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks so much. Bye.